This program is funded in part by Chasing the Dream, WNET's public media initiative to provide a deeper understanding of the impact of poverty on society.
Support for this program is provided by the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting and from viewers like you.
Hello and welcome to Louisiana Public Square. I'm Barry Irwin, president of the Council for a Better Louisiana. I was also a member of last year's legislative task force on tax policy. Tonight we'll be examining one of the state's most generous tax breaks for business, the Industrial Tax Exemption Program, or ITEP. Under the plan, new and expanding businesses are exempt from local property taxes for up to 8 years. The proponents of the program say it stimulates investment and creates jobs. Critics say ITEP reduces local taxes and, by extension, local services. While the program was championed by former Governor Jindal, Governor Edwards made changes to it last June, including bringing local government into the decision-making process. Tonight, we'll discuss those changes and more with leaders in economic development, tax policy, industry, and grassroots organizations as we explore industrial tax matters.
Steve Nosaka is the mayor of the town of Gramercy in St. James Parish. The parish has many geographical advantages in attracting business.
Our single biggest advantage is infrastructure. The Mississippi River is like none other. But beyond that, we've got Class 1 railroads on either side of the river. We've got a roadway infrastructure that includes the interstate highways, and we've got enough natural gas in pipes already traversing under the ground to supply industry needs.
But Nosaka says the state's Industrial Tax Exemption Program, or ITEP, has also been important in getting manufacturers to move or expand locally.
We're a small parish, about 22,000 people, with about 8,000 total jobs here in the parish, of which over 3,000 are attributable to industry and logistics companies that support industry. So it's a significant portion of St. James Parish's economy, both in terms of jobs and in tax revenues.
ITEP incentives are state-given exemptions for a company's local property taxes. There's an initial award that can be granted up to 100% for 5 years. That can be renewed at 80% for up to 3 years. Rob Landry is with the Louisiana Chemical Association. He says sometimes the river and infrastructure aren't enough to give Louisiana the upper hand.
The advantages Louisiana sees in having lush natural resources and availability to massive waterways is negated by our unbalanced tax structure.
In the past, a state board had wide authority to grant the exemption, but Governor Bel Edwards made slight changes to the program in June of last year. Now, local entities have more input. Diane Hanley is a volunteer with an interfaith group that's active in state and local politics. It's called Together Baton Rouge.
We have to take advantage of that. We have to make our voices known. So it's not strong if people don't come forward and demand more scrutiny over the businesses that come through.
Together Baton Rouge has sorted through all of the ITEP incentives granted in East Baton Rouge Parish since 2000.
Before, over 99% of the businesses who applied got it. There was no scrutiny. It was just a rubber stamp. So now what we're saying is now local entities who feel the brunt of the cost can actually have a say in it. And I think that's the biggest difference that has occurred.
Hanley says that near automatic exemption has opportunity cost. The EBR school system, for example, will lose $28.8 million to ITEP in 2017. New regulations will give the school system a choice.
Will we spend it on, for example, universal pre-K for every child in the parish? 28.8 could almost pay for that completely. Or you could give a $9,000 increase in teacher pay. You can make smaller classroom sizes. There's all kinds of ways you could spend that money.
Together Baton Rouge argues that ITEP hasn't lived up to its promise to create jobs. According to their analysis of data provided by the state, in Baton Rouge, the bulk of exemptions have been granted for routine on maintenance and upgrades and resulted in 2,000 fewer jobs.
Should we be incentivizing for there to be less jobs created? Well, that's not called an incentive, that's called a gift. When there is public money being given for an entity that is not creating a public good, then there should be scrutiny and there should be no public money given.
Landry contends that doesn't show the full picture.
For every one permanent job that is created at a chemical manufacturing facility in Louisiana, there are more than 9 other jobs that are created that are a direct result of that job. And so whether those are construction or contracting or engineering or supplying uniforms or supplying catering to the facility, all those jobs are only there because of the facilities.
Nosaka says those indirect jobs are an important part of the locals' decision.
Jobs for our local people, business for our local suppliers is always going to be key. Not just the total dollars that are coming in directly from them. We want to see the parish grow. We want to see more employment for our local residents. We want to see our businesses, our small businesses prosper.
Henley says there's more to consider, like how a school board itself might benefit economic development.
They can use it either for to make an educated workforce. They can make a better school system so that industries, when they're trying to attract employees, will be attracted here because of a good public school system.
Going forward, as the state aims to tackle its fiscal woes, ITEP may see further scrutiny.
Joining us to explore industrial tax matters is our studio audience. It includes members of the Louisiana Municipal Association and the Louisiana Association of Business and Industry. We also have representatives from Together Baton Rouge and the Louisiana Federation of Teachers. Students from Lafayette and St. Francisville from the Legislative Youth Advisory Council are also here. And thanks to everyone for participating with us tonight. According to a study recently completed by Together Baton Rouge, of the 80 companies receiving ITEP in East Baton Rouge Parish, 98.84% were already located in the parish. Just 1.16% of them opened a new facility or came to locate in the parish. The Together Baton Rouge analysis of the top 7 recipients of ITEP in East Baton Rouge shows that over a 10-year period of the tax break, 89 jobs were created among these industries, but 2,112 jobs were lost, for an overall net loss of 2,024 jobs in the parish. But according to data from Louisiana Economic Development, or LED, the jobs brought to the state through ITEP are manufacturing jobs that pay on average $1,300 per week compared to only $850 a week for all other jobs. LED also notes that since 2012, companies have announced more than $135 billion in capital investment projects in Louisiana, and in 2016, 5 companies receiving the ITEP are spending a record-setting $30 billion in capital investment in the state. So obviously there are some conflicting views on the value of ITEP, so we want to engage our studio audience and really to ask you the question, what do you see as the pluses or minuses of the ITEP program? Anybody want to get started? There's got to be somebody here that wants to go. Karen.
Well, I think what makes the governor's executive order brilliant in its scope and mission also makes it very problematic in its application, and that is the competing tax administrators within a parish, their priorities, the dynamic between them, their needs. There is no bright line formula that works, so it really takes a very labor-intensive cooperative effort between municipal governments, parish governments, all the stakeholders, school boards, and of course business and industry.
And you do represent local government with the municipal association.
I do, and there is generally a willingness among municipal governments to sit down at the table and figure out what is the best deal. As Mayor Nosaka noted, it's not just the industrial tax dollars that might be coming in, but the overall picture. Does it create jobs? Does it create long-term economic development? Those are the very tricky questions that we have to work collaboratively with all stakeholders to answer.
And there are a lot of agencies that receive these tax dollars that may have different interests from the whole ITEP program. Catherine, from Together Baton Rouge, any thoughts?
Well, a very recent study has shown that the ITEP program has not attracted industry to Louisiana, and it has not done what we as a state had hoped it would do. In fact, it's one of the things that we do come in #1 in the nation as the worst at it. if you look at what the states close to us give, they don't give a fraction of it. And for those 2,228 jobs that were lost, basically that represented $200,000 each for those lost jobs that were still given to the entities. I think the biggest concern for those of us as citizens is the accountability involved in it, and how do we ensure that there is representation that goes with this taxation. I mean, this is basically our money.
Well, let me ask that for some folks on the industrial side of things. What about the accountability for the program and in terms of the benefits it provides? Adam with the Baton Rouge Chamber.
Sure, and I want to just point out that the Baton Rouge area economy has been a bright spot in the state. We've actually seen record numbers of total jobs as a metro area. Historically, in the last couple of years, we've seen the Baton Rouge area really leading for Louisiana alongside Southwest Louisiana as two really strong bright spots in the state's economy. And so much of that has come from the expansion of the industrial corridor and quite a lot of industrial construction activity that's happening. So it is worth pointing out that a lot of good has been happening in the economy overall, and we have seen substantial growth from that. The accountability of the program is one of the, I think, the great features of the governor's executive order. Two significant changes that matter. One is it requires a cooperative endeavor agreement that sort of puts on the project a requirement to do what they said they would do. And the second big thing is the incorporation of local governments, I think is going to give much more involvement in the discussion to how that works. One of the key things I think we're interested in seeing is that we don't lose our competitive edge as a state to do so. We've enjoyed that. We've been able to attract projects to Louisiana. We want to make sure we can continue to do so with greater accountability through that program changes.
And it's one of the tools among many. Vic, you had something?
Well, the rural part of that, okay, is, and I know every area of the state is going to be a little different, but I come from a part of the state, the Bayou region, where manufacturing is a big base there. You have national-owned companies. You also have homegrown companies, third, fourth generation, some of them, big companies. And somewhere along the development and the growth of these companies, they participated in ITEP. And the result of that is, since then, the 10-year tax exemption period has passed, and now some of those companies, a lot of those companies, are the biggest taxpayers in the Bayou parishes, okay? They created jobs. This program helps create jobs, but not just jobs, like Adam said. I'm talking good paying jobs, which created even more jobs. Not to mention the lift and the enhanced school system and public safety that was lifted in the end. Maybe it's because I'm old, I've been around too long, but I saw this program work through its fruition, okay? So I know it comes on the inside of this thing too. Now, what's the problem? I think, could it be perhaps maybe that we don't have enough public education about this to our community, the benefits of these programs and how this, you can't just look at one part of it. You got to look at how it affects everything else. Bottom line is, for my area, it does what it said it would do, and that's where I'm at.
Cynthia, do you have a counterpoint of view on that or a different thought?
Well, I'll say this, citing the Together Baton Rouge study, they said that the local school districts were losing almost $600 million a year because of the program. This year, the MFP program, which funds our public schools here in Louisiana, Bessie and the legislature approved it without an increase. Typically, or theoretically, we should get a 2.75 increase every year. But we haven't seen that since 2014. So we still have to fund public education. Costs keep going up, yet we don't get an increase. So when we don't get the money from the state, it's the local school districts that have to make that up. And so when you look at that, you have to have concern. You want to see accountability. You want to see oversight. And you hear so many conflicting reports. I know that you were mentioning how they've, the jobs that they were creating and all that. But if you listen to the Revenue Estimating Committee, testimony there, they talk about one of the reasons we're having such a hard fiscal time here in Louisiana is that we're not creating higher paying jobs, that we're actually losing higher paying jobs. So I think you're absolutely right. I think it's a question of educating, but also getting the right information, making sure it's accurate.
Let me ask Lucian. He is a tax assessor, so you're sort of in the middle of it in St. John Parish, which is an active parish in terms of industrial development. What are your thoughts?
Well, coming from industry, I was in industry for 24 years, and am a new assessor. I see the importance of industry being in our parish and bringing new jobs, but I also see the taxing entities and the need for the tax dollars. So to be fair, when I look at the ITEP and the 10-year exemption that they've received, it's sometimes hard to see how we can give them another exemption when I have some small businesses that are saying, well, what about me? Maybe I deserve another, or I deserve some sort of tax break also. So it's more to be fair to everyone, especially since the ITEP has already gotten, most of them anyways, have gotten 10-year tax exemptions, and they're looking for not necessarily to bring on more jobs, which that would be great if we could guarantee that it would be job creations and that it would be equitable to the taxing entities and to my parish. But there's no guarantee that it does that. Most times it's just they're trying to keep up with or do a facelift on their industries to maintain what they were producing before.
Really quickly, what about that in terms of the job creation? That's a big part of the change that the governor is making with a focus on that. Are we doing enough in that? Jeff or Jason, any thoughts along those lines? Ray, any of you?
Yeah, I think that the job creation is at a pretty much standstill. I've been in the area for 10, 30 years or better, but at any rate, what I see that is a real major problem, especially here in Baton Rouge, is that those companies that have been on, like for lack of better words, a free ride with this tax exempt, they're not putting into the infrastructure. And when I say not putting into the infrastructure, we have needs here. The needs here are for better or newer highways and bridges, and they use a lot of these things that we need to upgrade. And we need some input. One other thing is the local government gets a hand-me-down from the state of these revenues, and it should be that they get the money direct instead of from the state.
We're almost through with this segment, but either Jason or Rhonda, one of y'all, do y'all have another thought to kind of close this segment out?
Barry, I think sometimes in this debate we're presented with a false choice, and I'm talking about the companies that are recruited as a result of ITEP, and it is an effective tool for bringing companies in. Represent the LNG industry that's currently building or will build this decade $88 billion worth of projects in the state. That is a capital-intensive industry where many of the projects would not exist in Louisiana were it not for that project, for the industrial tax exemption. We're creating 30,000 construction jobs, 2,500 high-paying permanent jobs in the state. Those are real projects, and we glaze over the billion number in the state so often because we hear it so much, but $88 billion is the equivalent of over 120 superdomes being built in the state. This is big money, this is big investment in the state that would not be possible. So when we have the false choice of whether it's schools or a giveaway to corporations, that's not really the choice, because in many of those $88 billion worth of projects would not be here to pay money into the schools when they come off the industrial tax exemption, to put money into the roads and infrastructure when they come off the industrial tax exemptions. So it's not really, in my mind, I believe it's a false choice when we say that, because many of those projects would not exist were it not for the industrial tax exemption.
Well, thanks. And clearly there's a lot to explore here, and we'll do that. But that's all the time we have for this portion of our show. When we return, we'll be joined by a panel of experts to further explore the changes to the Industrial Tax Exemption Program. Welcome back to Louisiana Public Square. Tonight we're discussing the pros and cons of the Industrial Tax Exemption Program. Joining us now is our panel of experts. Don Pearson has been Secretary of Louisiana Economic Development since his appointment by Governor Edwards in January of 2016. Previously, he served in business development for LED since 2005. He has more than 27 years of economic development experience. Broderick Baggard is an organizer with Together Baton Rouge and Together Louisiana, which works with civic and religious organizations to foster change in their communities. Broderick holds master's degrees from Oxford University and the London School of Economics. Gregory Bowser is the president of the Louisiana Chemical Association, or LCA, which represents the interests of 66 chemical manufacturing companies statewide. He also heads the Louisiana Chemical Industry Alliance, a partnership of Louisiana's chemical plants, their suppliers, contractors, and vendors. And finally, Wendy Curfey-Aguilard has been serving the people of Calcasieu Parish in the tax assessor's office since 1996. She's been the assessor since her first election in October of 2011. In 2015, she was named Assessor of the Year. Before we go to our audience questions, I'd like to start with each of you and ask just a fairly simple question in just 2 or 3 sentences to try and keep it as brief as we can so we can get to our audience. What do you think about the changes that the Governor Edwards, has made in the Industrial Tax Exemption Program starting last year? And we'll start with you, Secretary Pearson.
Well, certainly the governor has brought about some very important changes to the program. One, introducing accountability. This cooperative endeavor agreement that's now required puts the company on record what they're going to provide to the communities. That's an important new feature. Beyond that, he's brought the local entities into the process. It is now required for the parish and the school board and the sheriff to have a voice. In 64 parishes, this is how this important program will be decided going forward. It is absolutely the cornerstone that we've built a fabulous economy on, one that we're very dependent on, but those parishes will now have a seat at the table.
So a positive change from LED. Mr. Baggert with Together Baton Rouge.
It's potentially one of the most important decisions that's been made by a governor over the last 40 or 50 years. For 81 years, Louisiana has done something different from any other state in the country, and that is it has allowed a state board to grant subsidies that a local governmental entity pays for. That disconnect between who approves the exemptions and who feels the cost of them is the core underlying reason why the program has gotten so out of control. It's the single largest subsidy for corporations that any state gives. That the executive order brought that back local is an extremely important development. That it tied it to jobs is extremely important. But nothing has changed yet, because the first round of exemptions that will face the new regulations are just coming into place. And the thing we all need to make sure is, one, that accountability doesn't get eroded, that we never say anybody except the local body whose taxes are at stake can grant authority to an exemption. And second, new jobs means new jobs. It doesn't mean keeping your jobs around. It doesn't mean construction jobs. It means full-time jobs, which was, we think, the governor's intent. So we hope that if it's implemented, it'll be extremely important.
That sounds like a maybe to me. Greg Bowser with the Louisiana Chemical Association.
Well, Barry, I think the changes is, it took away some of the advantage that Louisiana had. Because one of the big things for Louisiana was that you had kind of a one-stop shop. You go to the state and you work through the state process, and that's how you got it done. Now we're in a situation where you have to go to all these local entities, negotiate with every local governing entity, and then hope that the governor likes it, because it's got to come back to him to sign off on it. If the key is, as I say, you want locals, it's their money, you want them to decide, well, let them decide. Why would you have to come back to the state to do that? Take your thumb off the scale and say, go do it. I think it's really hurt us in the long run. We'll see how it plays out.
Thanks. And Assessor Wendy Aguilard.
Well, I think it depends on who you're asking. If I talk to my local industry, some of them think it hurts them. If I talk to my local governing authorities, some of them thinks it helps them, and they think it's about time that they have a say about where their tax dollars are going. So we have to have some balance there, and we'll see how it plays out.
One thing I've learned tonight just from the assessors is it is a balancing act depending on which side you're having to balance. We want to go to our audience questions now. We want to start with Norman, and I think you had a question for Greg Bowser with the Chemical Association.
Yes, Mr. Bowser, I know that there's a misconception or perception out there, and that those parishes that have the most abundant numbers of these industrial tax exemptions, that they're struggling in terms of teacher pay and property tax collection. But if you really look into the numbers, particularly those parishes along the river region here, that's not the case. Can you help dispel maybe that misconception and talk about those numbers and what it really means in those parishes that do have an abundant amount of those exemptions in place?
Sure. One of the things, when you look at the top parishes that have the highest industrial property tax exemptions, Those parishes are also the same parishes that pay their teachers the highest, spend the most on schools, and they generate more dollars. And it's because when you hear people talk about the spinoffs that the jobs create, that's what causes that. And let's remember something. The industrial property tax exemption does not take any tax dollars away from any governing authority. It doesn't take any money away from any governing authority, because if that industry is not there, if that investment is not made, you're not getting that tax. So it's not like you go in and you exempt the property that was already there. And the other thing is that once a property gets the industrial tax exemption, when the 10 years are up, that facility, that portion is not eligible for another 10-year tax exemption. So it's a one-time thing, and the spin-off jobs are incredible. I represent the Chemical Association. We also have an organization called the Louisiana Chemical Industry Alliance. That's 850 businesses, men and women who own their own business, who do business with the chemical industry, who live right here in Louisiana, that employ our citizens. And so it is a big economic impact.
Broderick's looking a little bit skeptical.
He will all night.
There's a popular imagination about what this program is and what it does. And in that popular imagination, this is all about attracting industry. So we looked at, especially in East Baton Rouge Parish, we looked at every single exemption and assessed it. What percent of the exemptions went to companies that weren't here before the year 2000? It was 99% that went to companies that were already here. Statewide, across every parish, it's between 80 and 99%, okay, go to companies that are already here. 300 companies have received this exemption every year, or almost every year, since the year 2000. Those 300 companies were not brought here by this exemption, at least not in the last 15 years. They keep getting it. They've gotten $11.6 billion in subsidy. These 300 that have continually got it. Those 300 companies had 86,000 full-time employees in the year 2000, and they have 44,000 full-time employees now. So for $11.7 billion, we've seen a net reduction of 42,000 jobs. If we get rid of those, which are nothing but waste because they're not incentivizing anything. They're not subsidizing companies coming in. They're not subsidizing job creation. If we get rid of those, we'll have resources to invest in real business attraction, real economic development, and that's our goal, is to get rid of the part that's not functioning as an incentive.
And let me ask you that, because this has already come up a couple of times, and Don, you were shaking your head a little bit. I mean, to that point, it has come up about the job, the benefits going to existing companies. I mean, from LED's perspective, how does that work in terms of the tool that you have using that?
Attorney Baggart's picking out sort of a cherry-picking approach to all of this. And the model that's being utilized, Catherine, I've got to tell you, is fatally flawed. When you talk about those same companies, it's not their same investment. Their first investment was on the tax rolls and went off. They made another investment, and we're glad they did, and they grew their workforce. If workforces are changing, there's a lot of reasons that can impact that, everything from hurricanes to market conditions to a lot of the things that we could deep dive into. We don't have time for that right now. But what I will tell you is this is a very important program. It is performance-based. It's not the only way you have to go. There's other ways for companies to get tax abatement in parishes, but if you choose to use the ITEP, but the model that speaks to all this lost revenue makes some very, very wrong assumptions. First of all, that the world would be the same with or without that ITEP exemption. That's not true. Secondly, it's this narrow focus of here's what we gave up for 10 years. These are not 10-year projects. These are 20, 30, 40, 50-year projects. Exxon's been here since 1910. They're on the tax rolls a lot longer than they're off the tax rolls. And finally, when companies and communities want the revenues that are coming in right away, those construction jobs are powering that. Those payrolls, those tax dollars that are coming through sales tax are there very quickly on site when you land a project. It would be great if we could lay down all our arms, but 4 out of 5 states have this program. They authorize the local voice, and it's an important one, and it's those elements to this model that make a lot of this a far different story than the one you're being fed.
Thanks. We wanted to go back to some of the studio audience questions. Kathy, you had a question that was interesting to me. It seemed like you were trying to get at whether the local government should have a say in all exemptions.
Well, you have a Board of Commerce and Industry, a state board, really directing local government taxes. So should we pass a constitutional amendment just to get rid of the Board of Commerce and Industry and have the local government make the decisions? Because we go to the local government when we want a millage for our school board, our library, in Baton Rouge for infrastructure. So should we have local government making those decisions rather than a state board?
So what's your question?
That's my question. Yeah. Should we do away with the Board of Commerce and Industry? Because that's an appointed board, and it's really telling East Baton Rouge Parish School Board, you're not going to collect this tax. So,
Greg, go ahead first.
No, I don't think you should do away with it. I think it makes it's a place that helps you to coordinate what's happening in the state on economic development. You talk about the state making decisions for local government. When that process started many years ago, there was a trade-off. The state also agreed to fund some things at the local level in return. So you have to, if you're going to take back the power, you got to take back the responsibility to fund some of those things yourself at the local level. I mean, I think that's a fair trade-off. And you talk about education a lot, Barry, and I think it's important. I think we all should pay for education. You don't have to take your homestead exemption. You can pay for education if you want to.
Greg, but if I spend $200,000 on my house, the assessor is going to come and they're going to charge me more taxes. They're not going to give me a tax exemption for creating a $400,000 house. They're going to charge me more taxes. So the next time Exxon goes, which was the last meeting I went to, asked for another tax exemption, they get it. They've been here since 1909.
Greg, respond really quickly, and then I'm going to get to the rest of our panel.
That's true, but the requirement is that Exxon has to invest a certain amount of dollars. They have to create so many jobs. That's what Don Pearson and his group is going to be looking at them doing. If you're going to invest something, and in return you're going to get an exemption, these are the things you have to do. It's the same way in other states. It's the same way all over the country. You've got to make a major investment. And if you're going to do that, you should get the exemption.
Broderick, and then Wendy.
The thing that puts us radically out of step with any other place in the country is the State Board of Commerce and Industry. When this was approved by voters in November of 1936, the language on the ballot said, do you support tax exemptions including for poultry and livestock? Okay. Originally this was about industry attraction. We were underdeveloped as a state at the time. What it has morphed into is not new investments. It's replacements of machinery that have to happen anyway. The difference between the industrial tax exemption and the homestead exemption is the homestead exemption is an entitlement. You are entitled to it if you own your own house and live in it. There is no entitlement allowed under economic development. You can get it only if you create benefits. We've never looked at the benefits. This is what we have started to do by analyzing the jobs on year one and the jobs at the end of the exemption. And if that methodology is embraced by Louisiana Economic Development, then we would happily amend it. So far we've seen not a single analysis in the last 8 decades that says how many jobs have been created, because it doesn't create jobs. It's subsidizing investments that have to be made routinely.
Clearly, disagreement over that piece of it. Wendy, from the assessor's point of view, you had something you wanted to make a point.
The important part to remember is that for every exemption, what happens is that local government has to have enough tax dollars to provide the services that are required of their community. So for every exemption that there is, it shifts the burden to the taxpayers that are paying. Whether it's a homestead exemption or whether it is an industrial tax exemption, it doesn't matter. An exemption is going to shift the burden of those community dollars to the other taxpayers that are paying for those services.
Let me pick up on that point because we have a couple of students here, as we mentioned, and Aaron, I think you had a question along those lines about the impact of not just this, but other exemptions perhaps on other businesses, other taxpayers. What was your question?
Yes, by giving this exemption to larger businesses, what kind of effect would this have on smaller businesses, since the larger businesses aren't providing these property taxes? So are they getting this burden?
There are no exemptions for smaller businesses. There are no industrial tax exemptions of any kind for a smaller business that may do some sort of other kind of business. Even if it's a large business property, say a large dealership, they don't get an exemption of any kind. Even if they're a very large company that does a lot of business in your particular parish, if it's a small mom and pop business, they don't get. So there is a discrepancy between an ITEP program that is giving an exemption for an industrial property that is not available to smaller businesses.
I'm just going to answer for some people. I think this point would come up because we want to get to some more audience questions. I would imagine some would say that the homestead exemption does the same thing for small businesses, and we have a high homestead exemption in our state. So it balances both ways.
Right.
Rhonda, I think you had a question dealing with K-12 education, public education.
Yeah, but if you don't mind, I'm going to change my question somewhat based on the discussion that's been held, because there's an opinion in the room that business is going to come because we have the Mississippi and the Gulf Coast. The majority of the state, including the 8 regions that I used to work in, we don't touch the Mississippi. We don't have the Gulf Coast. We're in the middle of the state. This benefits your middle of the state, your north, west, and northeast part of the state to attract other than Mr. Bowser's companies to our area. We don't get the $20 billion LNG plants. We might get a $500 million manufacturer. To say the program doesn't exist for small business is a complete misnomer. I represent a company who has 10 jobs. They were just approved for an industrial tax exemption because they were able to add 4 jobs. That's big for that small business. The only requirement is manufacturers. It doesn't say 10 people, 20 people, 2,000 people. We have to consider this, and I want the panel to address this because the governor has now made it about head count. What are we going to do about the technological changes in manufacturing, which are reducing head counts, increasing payroll, which means payroll dollars and all the taxes affiliated with that, and increasing capital investment, which after 10 years is increasing property tax.
Yeah, broader, that's a big issue that is actually...
Companies locate in areas to make money. That's the only reason they do it. It's the profit motive. When the profit motive is there and they're making money, they don't need to be separately incentivized. The case you're talking about where without this they go one place and with this they come here is about 3% tops. In 97%, there's no location element being decided, right? Now, if that small business created 4 jobs, they're doing more than 96% of the ones that are not creating jobs for this very reason, because all over, they're not doing anything wrong, they're not shipping jobs overseas, they are improving their technology and becoming more capital intensive and less labor intensive. That's a trend in high-tech industry all over the country, all over the world. The question is, should we be asking our school boards to put up hundreds of millions of dollars to subsidize that when they're going to do it anyway, when they're in a location, because it's bringing them profit to make those.
There's a lot of head shaking about whether those jobs are going to come.
That they've got to come up with money, and it's back to this program doesn't cost $1.
No, that's factually untrue. Secretary Pearson, that is factually untrue.
It's absolutely true. How do you take the revenue off if you don't have the company there? How are you going to gain revenue from it? You don't get any revenue until that company makes an investment and puts people to work.
But if they're already here making routine investments that they would have made anyway.
Those are the companies we want to see expand.
Well,
and here's where we're happy to agree with you. We want every deal to have an analysis and a return on investment for the state that's good for the citizens. And that's where we operate at Louisiana Economic Development. To your question, one of the things I think is very important, it's not about car dealerships or hospitals. This program, this industrial tax exemption program is only for manufacturers. When you throw that rock in the water, the ripples go everywhere. Lots of jobs outside the fence line because of the powerful payrolls, the high-paying jobs, the input and output of a facility that manufactures. So we're really only talking about a small business, a small segment of all businesses that are even eligible for this program.
Real quick, and then we've got some questions. This is
I'll
starting
go
to generate
quick.
a little bit more.
You know, you hear a lot of talk about, well, they were going to do it anyway. Companies have to modernize, and companies compete within a corporation. We have plants here in Louisiana. We have plants in Texas that do the exact same thing. And if they have to modernize, and Louisiana says, no, we're not going to give you an exemption to modernize or upgrade that plant or to do that, the company's not going to lose business. They're simply going to move it to Texas, who will do it. There's a reason why more states do this than that don't, because they understand how it works. And you still have to create the jobs, and you have to make the capital investment. Now, if you tell a small business, if you make a $3 billion capital investment, we're going to give you these exemptions, they'll have a problem with that. Most small businesses are cash strapped. But this program is designed to attract capital-intensive businesses to locate here, because that's where the high-paying jobs are. And the ripple effect is so great. Now, the Secretary and DED, they're in charge of keeping it within the realms and signing the agreements and saying this is what the trade-off is going to be. And the idea that you're losing money, if the plant's not there, you're not getting any money anyway. If the property's sitting there, you're not getting any money. And finally, remember, when that property comes on the tax roll, it's not assessed at 10% of value like your home is. It's at 15%. That's a huge difference.
This has kind of created some questions here from Alix, who is another one of our students, had a quick question, I think, and then we've got some others. We want to try and get to them as many as we can.
Okay, this is less of a numbers question, more of a question about community involvement from these businesses that receive ITEP subsidies. So, my father grew up in Roxana, Illinois, and a lot of what happened in Roxana was Shell. Shell Oil was a huge part of their community, and they contributed so much to the community that the high school's football team was called the Shells. Now, my question for you is, does ITEP and this lack of giving to the community for 10 years discourage involvement of out-of-state companies who just kind of come in to make capital and not pay their taxes?
I'll take a shot at that. I'll tell you that the answer to that is no. If you take a look around companies, their employees are out in the community. You have a United Way drive. Let's look at who's giving. Those are the same companies that take part in the community. We recently had the floods here in Baton Rouge area. There were company employees out there working. There were companies giving back. Companies who make things that go into cleaning and repairing your home, they were donating stuff back to the community. So no, it doesn't discourage them. They're very involved in the community. I know if you go in the Lake Charles area, for example, they're very involved. You talk to
For the
anyone.
most part, you'll find they're particularly involved in schools because you're the future. You're the workforce. You're who's coming to work at that plant.
Southwest Louisiana, you couldn't find better partners in education in all over your community. All of our industries are very involved in our community. They give back in all kinds of ways.
Yeah. Really quick. The assessor knows real quickly, if you talk about industries, I mean, you talk to the assessors in their community, most industries adopt schools in their local areas.
Absolutely.
They're participating. So they're involved.
This is part of why this whole discussion and this program has gotten so haywire, is two things have become confused. One is, do we value these companies? The other is there a value to the company of this specific investment? My sister works for Shell, okay? They've sent her on an executive track to the Netherlands. She's in Trinidad right now. We value our major employers, our biggest philanthropic donors, people who employ our citizens. They're hugely valuable.
Absolutely.
It is illegal and unconstitutional to give an incentive, an exemption to somebody purely because you value them.
That's correct.
You can't. That's a gift. You can only give an incentive if it is bringing about something that would not have happened otherwise. If I give you money to wake up in the morning, you're not going to wake up any more than you would otherwise, right? And what we're saying is it does cost money because virtually all of the capital expenditure that companies are making, that manufacturing industry is making, is being subsidized. The only way in which that's not costing us money is if you're presuming that if we didn't give these exemptions, they would make no capital investment.
We found common ground. We will not subsidize people for waking up in the morning.
But there you go.
But we do it every single day, and I've done it for 80 years, and that's what we need to stop.
That's not true. Your presumption is that if you don't give them the incentive, they're going to be here anyway.
Our argument is you need to do an analysis. It is called a but-for analysis, which is if it weren't for this incentive, what would the result be done? No place does an incentive like this without doing that analysis. If you do that analysis and just keep the exemptions for the cases where there's an expansion of business, where you're attracting something into the state or into a parish, or you're creating jobs, we're all for it. We just supported one in Ascension Parish.
64 parishes get to make that analysis.
That's right, and that's what we need to process. That's what's so historic about the executive order. But we need to make sure it's a real analysis, not done by people who themselves are benefiting financially from the exemptions if they're provided, because that's not an independent
I think we're pretty
analysis.
clear that there's a difference of opinion on that one, and we do have a couple more questions. And Naomi, you had one that I wanted to get to.
And I may kind of shift in mine a little bit.
I think we kind of stirred up the pot here.
That's right. I'm a citizen of East Baton Rouge Parish. I pay my taxes. I vote for taxes that the school board and the local government and the sheriff all put up. I always vote for them because I feel like that's important. I'm also a retired school principal, so I know quite a bit about educational financing. And what bothered me about this when I learned about it is I thought, I've been saying yes to these tax millages that come up on the ballot. And when I found out how much was being exempted, I felt cheated in some way. Like, gee, I had to pay my tax and I voted for it, and yet we're giving it away. And that was the way it seemed to me. And of course, I'm interested in the schools, and I really don't think schools should be asked to exempt any of their dollars from taxes. I think that's important. And I just would like for you to tell me about that. Tell me what you think about my analysis of this, because I feel like I think the public has never been told that all of these exemptions are being exempted from their millages.
The biggest taxpayer here in East Baton Rouge Parish is ExxonMobil. If you look at where schools are doing the best in our state, look nearby, because you're going to see a lot of manufacturers that one time or another did enjoy that brief period, 10 years, of tax exemption. But now they're on the tax rolls and they're working hard and they're supporting the schools in their region.
But we are still very low in East Baton Rouge Parish on the list of schools for the district.
And ExxonMobil has been in East Baton Rouge Parish.
So, I mean, I'm not sure I agree with you on your statement.
And I think Renee maybe had something to kind of piggyback on that question a little bit.
Well, yeah, my feeling, I've been to several of the Commerce and Industry Board meetings, Mr. Pearson, and my feeling when I came away from it was that Louisiana economic development was gung-ho and pro-industry, and that there was a bias, quite frankly. It seemed like you were a lobby group for them. And then you see these corporations that have made these applications for the exemptions. I would feel like you were representing the taxing entities, the local school boards, the fire departments, the sheriffs, and that need their money. They need that money. It's not as though any of them really are doing well without it. They're suffering the lack of it. So these companies are making profits. What can you do to change that look? And I'll give you a suggestion.
I love that.
There you go.
You're going to give me a problem and a solution.
So here you go. All right. So when I was on a panelist for the National Endowment for the Arts, the staff, we would see all of the applications, but there would be some that we didn't have to consider because they would tell us these people don't meet the criteria, so you don't have to judge them. That at least, when a corporation put forth an application and there are no jobs created, when it is not tied to greater production, why can't they just be, from your staff, say they don't meet the criteria? You don't have to worry about them. You can see that they applied, but they don't meet the criteria. Don't even consider that.
We do a lot of that, and that's really why we think there does need to be a Commerce and Industry Board. If we don't do that, then we shift that burden onto 64 parishes. And maybe some of our urban parishes can handle that, but you've got a lot of rural parishes around our state that would really be burdened by that. But the idea is that only the qualified companies that are going to build and employ are going to get the abatement for that brief period of time. What we see ourselves doing is not, maybe as you characterize, providing a benefit to a company that's already making a profit. Quite frankly, we want them to make a profit, not go out of business, because I want to drive by that parking lot every morning in front of that facility and see it full of cars and know that people just like those in this room tonight can go home and then make their mortgage note and put food on the family's table and pay their health care and do all the things to take care of their families. And that starts with a good paying job. And we're charged with producing those, so we want to calculate that return on investment. We want to make smart deals for the people in this state. And we're against corporate welfare. We understand how to invest and compete. But believe me, this is a competition that's ongoing across this nation, across this globe.
I wanted to just shift real quickly because we're trying to catch everybody here. And you touched on something just a second ago, Don, in terms of tools and global challenges, global competition. I think, Jeff, you had a question along those lines. It seemed to be about not just maybe competition locally, but competition globally.
Yes, I sure did. So my question is really a question of timing. And, historically, places like the U.S. in general, Louisiana in particular, have lost a lot of manufacturing jobs to places like China and Mexico, who are able to offer lower wages than we can pay here. And if you need a reminder of that, just drive through the back roads of Louisiana. Certain rural areas, their entire economy has basically disappeared over the past few decades. But we're finally in a place, I agree, manufacturing's become less labor intensive, more capital intensive. With that, it's become more feedstock intensive and more energy intensive. And those are two areas where we have a huge competitive advantage, both in terms of relative natural gas prices and relative power prices. And so my question is now the right time to increase the tax burden on industry, precisely when they're making such a massive investment in Louisiana? And if you need evidence of that, look at Lake Charles, look at the Mississippi River corridor with a lot of the reshoring of manufacturing and chemical investment we've seen there. So is now the right time, first off? And then secondly, how does Louisiana compare to its neighbors competitively in terms of industrial tax exemption?
Broderick's itching.
It couldn't be a more important time. For 81 years, this has been our most expensive program of economic development. It is 10 times larger than the film tax credits that we hear a lot about. This program is 10 times larger. It's 5 times larger than all the others combined. And after 81 years, we're last or next to last in economic development. And it's precisely the opportunity cost of that we've lost to incentivize different kinds of jobs that are staying around. Right now, with the investments that have been made, if we allow no benefit on the investments into existing companies, just take Exxon. Exxon is in 2000. Exxon generated 503,000 barrels of oil in East Baton Rouge Parish. They're there because of low energy costs. They've got one of the most efficient refineries in the world. It's an extremely important investment for them, the second largest in their entire global portfolio. Right? Today, they generate 503,000 barrels of oil. Jobs have gone from about 1,250 full-time jobs to 864. The production is the same, and during that period of time, they've gotten 74 separate exemptions just at their refinery. Why are we subsidizing things that are already incentivized, that are not about generating economic activity? Every time we do that, we make taxpayers pay more, and we lose the opportunity to invest funds in the rural areas and the places where people are losing jobs, and that's the biggest cost of this, and why it's so important that it happens now. We don't lose another decade to these kind of trickle-down theories that have never worked and have failed more in a greater way here than almost any place in the world.
Let's get out of the rearview mirror. The governor's reform package requires that these exemptions create jobs. So this idea that there's all this investment that will be shielded is no longer applicable to this conversation tonight.
It's a huge part of what everybody needs to look forward to going forward, because it says create jobs, but the rules allow retention of jobs. Here's a prediction, okay? We're going to start seeing every company come forward and say they now need these incentives to retain existing jobs. That the LNG plants that need a deep water port, okay, that all the plants that need and so in making sure that sticks, Secretary Pearson, if it does, you will not hear from us on this topic. We'll be more than happy.
That may be where they come, but they better bring their school board, their sheriff, and their police jury with them.
Let me ask Wendy something really quickly, representing local government. You have a lot of major investment in Cameron Parish from international companies in the area.
That's okay, yes.
how does that play out in terms of what you do locally?
Well, I think with what Secretary Pearson is saying, going forward with what the governor is trying to change, it's going to be a balancing act. If everything works the way that we are hoping it will moving forward, and the companies are continuing to grow and bring in all the jobs that they're supposed to be bringing, and the other companies thrive around them, and the local governing authorities have the ability to say, this is what we want to do with the state. If it works the way it's being touted at this point, it should be okay for everybody. That's the part that we have to see.
You have to go, but very quickly, I have to say that,
final say.
A lot of things that what Broderick's saying is just not accurate. It's just not. You take a look at those facilities, he's making an assumption that they're going to be here, no matter what. The LNG facility is going to be here. You can tax it anyway. It doesn't work that way.
I'm saying you analyze whether or not there's a competitive element.
That's not true. It's not accurate. So those companies have options. They don't have to be here in Louisiana. Yes, we have low natural gas, but so does Texas. So does other states. We have the Mississippi River. Well, the Mississippi River doesn't stop in Louisiana. So we have all of those things. We have to be competitive. And the secretary, and a lot of credit to his department, they've got to be competitive with these other states. They can't make that assumption that, well, we don't need to give it because they love the sunshine in Louisiana and Broderick said it's great, so they need to come here. Doesn't work.
Just to underline a distinction, what we're saying is there needs to be an analysis that shows that a competitive element. What the Chemical Association is saying is that we ought to give it to everybody across the board in case there's somebody that has a competitive situation, right? That has been the position.
This has been a great and enthusiastic conversation, and we've enjoyed it. I think our audience has gotten a lot out of it, but we're going to have to leave it right there, unfortunately. But thanks so much to you. And yes, we've run out of time for our question and answer segment, but we'd like to thank our panelists, Secretary Don Pearson, Mr. Baggert, Mr. Bowsard, and Ms. Aguillard from Calcasieu Parish for their insights on this month's topic. When we get back in just a few minutes, we'll have some closing comments. Well, that's all the time we have for this edition of Louisiana Public Square. We encourage you to visit our website at lpb.org/public square. While you're there, you can comment on tonight's show, and we'd love to hear from you. You'll also want to tune in next month when Louisiana Public Square looks deeper into TOPS, the Tuition Scholarship Program. The state's cost of funding the program has nearly tripled over the last 10 years. Should TOPS be based on financial need? Should TOPS graduates be required to stay in the state or pay back the award? We'll explore these issues and more on Studying TOPS, Wednesday, August 23rd. Thanks for watching, and good night.
For a copy of this program, call 1-800-973-7246 or go online to www.lpb.org.
Support for this program is provided by the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting and from viewers like you.